Hi everyone, today we're going to analyze a game which features a very amazing queen sacrifice. Many consider this queen sacrifice as the best queen sacrifice ever, and this sacrifice was played by Rashid Nesmetdinov, who was a player born in 1912 in what was then the Russian Empire, and he was playing as white against Oleg Chernikov. And before we start analyzing the full game, what I like about this sacrifice and the game as well is that the sacrifice is very sound and both players played a very good game even if we analyze this game today. So the whole idea of the sacrifice was sound even though white gave a lot of material and black played the game still fairly well, which helps a lot to make this game even more memorable. So let's now get started with the game. White played the move e4 and after c5 we get the Sicilian defense. White played the move knight to f3 and after knight to c6 d4, pawn takes and knight takes, we get an open Sicilian, and here black played the move g6, which leads the game to the accelerated dragon. This is a line that I covered quite deeply in one of my videos that you might want to check after watching this video, because here we're not going to focus on the opening stage a lot, but the main point is to develop the bishop to g7 while still keeping some flexibility with the central pawns. And here white has many options. c4 is one idea, knight to c3 is another main way to continue, which is the way in which white continued. And after bishop to g7, bishop to e3 defends the knight, knight to c6, white played bishop to c4, this is still fairly standard. And after black castled, here white played the move bishop to b3, and here in this position the most common and natural way to continue is to play d6 in order to develop this bishop on c8. a5 is another idea, trying to create threats against the bishop on b3. But here black played another move which is not that common, but still fairly interesting, which is the move knight to g4. So here black has the idea to take the bishop on e3, and this knight on g4 seems to be hanging. But the point is that after taking on g4, black can recapture back on d4, which is what happened on the game. In any case, I just want to briefly mention that here white could take on c6, but this is not very good for white, with the idea to take on g4 back, because here black would not take with the b pawn, because after queen takes, white would win a piece. But here black has several options. Black could even take with the d pawn, and now the knight on g4 is defended. And black could even try taking the bishop on e3, which is a very strong piece in this position. So here taking on e3 directly would ruin white's pawn structure. And if white tries to take on d8, for example, now black can take on d1, and we get these exchanges on which black is doing perfectly fine. Or if white tries knight takes e7, which might look like an interesting try to give a check before taking the knight on e3. But after queen takes and pawn takes, white gets an extra pawn, but this is just temporary because black can simply take on c3 or first give a check, and after g3, now take on c3 giving a check, and after pawn takes and queen takes, black is doing perfectly fine. We see how white's pawns are actually quite weak and white is not even having a material advantage. In any case, after knight to g4, if you ever get this position, you just simply take the knight. And now here black normally captures with the knight is normally gonna be better placed there. Additionally, black normally wants to keep this bishop on g7 because it's protecting the king. That's why knight takes e4 is definitely more natural. And here white has a few options. White will normally have to move the queen on g4 because there might be some indirect attacks against it. And here one very direct way to go is to go queen to d1, attacking the knight. Black doesn't have an easy way to hold the knight there. For example, e5 would weaken the d5 square. Or if white takes on b3, after pawn takes, we are now activating this rook on a1, so black has to do something with this pawn, for example a5. And now after bishop to d4, we just invite these trades of bishops. And overall, white gets quite a comfortable position. White is also a bit better developed, so this line would normally leave to a slight edge for white. But Nesmetdinov, who was a very aggressive, creative and attacking player, played the move queen to h4, which is definitely more ambitious. White wants to keep the queen on the king side in order to try to get an attack. One idea might be to try bishop to h6 in order to trade bishops and develop an attack against black's king. And here in this position, black played the move queen to a5. Again, I think that d6 was definitely the most natural way to go, planning to develop this bishop on c8. Black could take on b3 sooner or later, but this knight on d4 so far is well placed, so black would normally wait for white to attack it before doing something there. So d6 was definitely a playable option, and in my view better than the one that was played in the game. Because here after queen to a5, black is trying to get some tactical ideas against this knight on c3. For example, after taking the bishop, bishop takes might be an idea. That's why here white doesn't want to capture the pawn on e7 that is now hanging after black played the move queen to a5. But here white simply played the move short castle, which is something that white was going to do anyway. So white was going to castle, so after white castles, now there's pressure on the pawn on e7. And surprisingly, it becomes a bit awkward to defend that pawn. For example, rook to e8 might be a move, but this rook is just very passive there defending a pawn. And white might even continue with knight to d5, increasing the pressure. So this is definitely good for white. Or playing e6 might be an idea, but after rook a to d1, we see how white is getting a development advantage. Pretty much all of white pieces are already active, so this position is also quite good for white. That's why here black played the move bishop to f6, simply attacking the queen. And one idea was maybe to continue with bishop to g7 after queen to h6. So here queen to h6 wouldn't achieve anything because black would play bishop to g7. The queen doesn't want to go to g4 or to h3 because the bishop on c8 would be eyeing the queen there. And if the queen goes to f4 or to g3, here actually it is black the one having a queen sacrifice. So here black could have continued with queen takes c3, and after pawn takes, knight to e2 would give a check and fork the king and the queen. King to h1 is the only move, and after knight takes and white takes the knight back, this pawn on c3 is hanging, so all in all black gets an extra pawn after this sequence of moves. So that was definitely not the idea that Nesmetinov had in mind, and here played the very brilliant move queen takes f6. So here white is just giving the queen for a bishop, and this knight is going to fall. So all in all, white is giving the queen for two minor pieces. Normally this is definitely not enough for a side to give a queen, but in this case, this idea is even sound. So this is what makes this sacrifice very amazing. And as said, what I like about this game is that black played fairly well. So in this position, black didn't capture the queen, but black played the move knight to e2 first. If black captures the queen after bishop takes, we get a very similar position, where white is just getting a better version, with the bishop already centralized and the knight on c3 ready to jump to d5. So let's evaluate some ideas behind the sacrifice. White gets this bishop and knight, but after taking on f6 we see that there's a change in the pawn structure on black side, which favors white because now the d5 square is a weak square, it can't be controlled by any pawn, and this square is gonna be great for white's pieces, particularly a knight on d5 is gonna be very powerful. Additionally, black now doesn't have the dot square bishop, so the dot squares are normally gonna be very weak. This is gonna be a recurrent idea about this sacrifice. And there's also a very direct idea, which is that now white wants to get knight to d5 and knight takes f6, for example, winning more material. So this sacrifice has a tactical idea behind, but it also gives white positional pluses. And this is something that whenever we sacrifice material is something that we should strive for. If we can get both positional and tactical compensation, we're normally going to have better reasons to sacrifice material. So in this line that was not playing the game, I just want to show you a sample line. If black wants to play the move f5 to avoid the loss of material, here after knight to d5, white's position is already better. So surprisingly, white being nominally 3 points down, because two minor pieces are normally worth 6 points and a queen 9 points. white is already having a much better position. So here white has big threats. Knight to e7 checkmate is a big threat. For example, after pawn takes, knight to e7 is a very nice checkmate. And we see how the dot squares are a problem on black's camp. But white also gets ideas to play knight to f6 if the checkmate threat is neutralized, and the king on g8 is going to be under regular attack, as we'll see in the game. But here black played a very subtle and strong move that kept black in the game, which is the move knight to e2. So before capturing the queen, black gives a check, and after knight takes, we see that knight on e2 is worse than on c3 because the knight on c3 was jumping to d5 very quickly. And after pawn takes, now we get a very similar version where white also doesn't get the bishop on d4, but on e3, the bishop on d4 is better placed. But in any case, we now know the main ideas of the position. White wants to get the minor pieces coordinated to attack black's king. That's another thing I like about this sacrifice, that white's play is very natural, whereas black's ideas in this position are, at least for me, not very easy to find. First of all, black has to develop the bishop on c8, which is very passive there, but black doesn't have easy targets in the position. White's pieces are all very well coordinated, defending each other. So after knight to c3, here black played rook to e8, activating rook, and after knight to d5, we see how powerful this knight is going to be there on d5. First of all, this pawn cannot be captured because after knight takes f6, we get a fork, and white is winning a full rook. That's why black played the move rook to e6, and we see that black's pieces are basically defending, whereas white's pieces are just very active, trying to create threats. After bishop to d4, this pawn on f6 is being attacked. Black played king to g7. So far black is defending the pawn f6, and here white continued improving his pieces. Rook a to d1. This rook is going to be well placed on the d file, but white might also have ideas to play a rook lift and go rook to d3 and then bring the rook to the king side, as we'll see. So here black played d6, which makes sense, finally trying to develop the bishop on c8, and after rook to d3, bishop to d7, developing the bishop, and here white played rook to f3. Just want to mention that in this position, taking on f6 is already quite a decent option for white, because after rook takes and rook to f3, white is getting material back, but Nesmetdinov, who was a very aggressive player, wanted to keep more pieces and get more attacking chances against black's king. That's why rook to f3 was played here, increasing the pressure on f6, which is now very hard to defend. Here black played bishop to b5, trying to counterattack, which is normally an interesting way to defend. And now actually white also counterattacked and played bishop to c3, attacking the queen. And after queen to d8, here white played the very strong knight takes f6. So white is getting material back, but more importantly, now a lot of threats are going to be created against black's king. And here in this position, which is from a practical point of view very hard for black to play, black already played a decisive mistake and played the move bishop to e2. But let's evaluate some other alternatives. Here black captures on f6. First of all, this rook is pinned, so white doesn't even have to capture it immediately, but even the simple bishop takes is already getting the material back for white, because now we get this fork, and after queen takes and rook takes, black can take any of the rooks, but after a move like rook to d1, white is already having a better position, having an extra pawn. So this is quite good for white. And another move that we could consider in this position is to take the rook on f1, but the idea of taking on f6 was to create threats against black's king, and here white has the very strong knight to g4, and I'm gonna show you some lines, but basically the whole point is that white has the knight, the rook, and the two bishops that are going to be eyeing black's king. So this should already gives us an idea that black's king is going to fall under attack. And additionally, we have this idea of taking the rook on e6. So here, for example, king to f8 wouldn't work because after bishop takes, this pawn f7 is pinned, and now we have ideas to take on f7. So white is going to get a decisive attack. Or if white plays king to g8, now we can still capture the rook on e6. Again, planning to take on f7. And what idea is that after taking e6, knight to h6 is a very nice checkmate. All of the squares around black's king are covered by white pieces, so taking on f1 was not a good alternative. So here in this position, black had an option to continue the game, which is, in my view, just extremely hard to find, which is the cold-blooded rook to c8. In a way it makes sense because it improves one of black pieces, but just leaving the king on g7 where it can become attacked very easily is just very hard to play. But the idea is to give back material, to give this rook for this very strong bishop on c3. And there's also the idea to play bishop to c4 to neutralize this bishop on b3. So this again is a very hard idea to find. So here in this position we don't have the idea of knight to g4 because black would just take the bishop on c3. And just to give you a line about how the game could have continued, after knight to e8, now we give a double check, so black has to move the king. For example, after king to g8, now we can take on e6, and after pawn takes, knight to f6, and king to g7, we can play rook to d1, improving the rook on f1, which was also being attacked, and here black can insist with this idea of rook takes, and here we have to take with the pawn because this knight on f6 is defended by the rook on f3, and after pawn takes we get this position, which is the best that black could have got. I still prefer being white here because materially now white is even better. White has two rooks and a pawn for the queen. Black's king is also normally going to be more exposed than white's king, but on the other hand, white's pawns are now a bit weak on the queen side, so black might get some ideas to counterattack those pawns. So this was black's best try, very difficult to find, but even here white is the one pressing for an advantage. And here in this position, black played bishop to e2 with the idea to capture this rook on f3, which is way stronger than the rook on f1 because this rook is attacking black's king. But here Nesverdinov, who was a very brilliant tactical player, found a very convincing way to win the game and played knight takes h7, offering more material, which was not accepted because after king takes and rook takes, white is still attacking black's king, and now this rook is also going to fall. Just to give you an idea, after king to g8, bishop takes is just very bad because there's going to be these covered checks against black's king. And after king to h6, white can first give a check, bringing the king further down because king to h7 would fail on account of bishop to f6. So after king to h7, bishop to f6, at the very least, is going to get material back. We get a discovered check and we attack the queen. So after king to h5, if king to g5, f4 is quite good for white. Or after king to h5, now we just take the rook on e6, and we still get an attack against this king, which is quite badly placed. For example, after bishop takes, we can play the move g4. After king to g5, we again get the move f4. Or if black plays king to h4, we get at the very least bishop to f6, getting material back and a better position. So after knight takes h7, black played king to g8, and here white could have played knight to f6, and then rook to h3, or rook to h3 was played in the game, which was probably more spectacular, as we'll see, because now white gets ideas to checkmate with the rook on h8. For example, after bishop takes, knight to g5 is just very strong, with the idea to play rook to h8, giving a checkmate. And if white tries king to f8, at the very least, after rook to h8, we're gonna get a material advantage. That's why here black tried rook to e5, which makes sense, this idea of giving material back for this very powerful bishop. And here Nesverdinov played another very brilliant move, very cold-blooded move, and played f4, still leaving this rook on f1. Who cares about this rook? White just wants to get the attack going. And after bishop takes and king takes, we still get all our minor pieces planning to attack black's king. Now we also get this pawn attacking the rook. So amazingly, the position is just winning for white. Here black played rook to c8, which is another idea that we saw, planning to capture the bishop. Here white didn't rush and take the rook on e5 because this would open the d file, and played another very quiet move, bishop to d4, keeping all the threats. And after b5 and knight to g5, black cannot move the rook because rook to h8 is going to be a checkmate. That's why black tried rook to c7, defending the f7 pawn. And here in this position again, white doesn't want to rush and take the rook on e5, but white found a brilliant combination to finish a brilliant game and played bishop takes f7, and after rook takes f7, another sacrifice was played, rook to h8, giving a check and planning to capture the queen. That's why king takes has to be played. And after knight takes f7, we get this fork against the king, the queen and the rook. So white is getting a material advantage in the end after king to h7, knight takes, now black capture the pawn on e4, and after knight to c6, rook takes f4, king to e2. In this position, black resigned, so black didn't want to continue this game for many moves because it might take some time to convert white's advantage, but white has a winning position here, so black decided to resign. Alright, so this is definitely one of my top queen sacrifices. In this position, giving the queen for the bishop and then getting the knight to get compensation in the form of having much better pieces, absolute control of the dot squares, and getting an attack against black's king. So keep this game in mind whenever you study attacking games, because this is definitely a model game. If you want to know more about the opening that was playing this game, feel free to check my video about it. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do it to get notified about my next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.